A new apprentice and seclusion ended. Following Victor's conversation and deal with Lorna, she kept coming over as his new assistant apprentice. At first, all she had to do was clean the house, cook, and get groceries for Victor, which gave him more time to delve into the labyrinth of magical lore and memories Yami contained in his mind. He also believed that the same applied to Incinerate Anthem, but since he had yet to personally converse or meet with the spirit of the gear, he couldn't delve into the memories of its previous wielders. A week after meeting Lorna, Victor and Yami were sitting on the couch with Victor scribbling at rapid speeds in his journal. Lorna, on the other hand, didn't need to clean much as Victor and Yami were not particularly messy. As Victor continued his study into magic, Lorna focused on cooking since Victor didn't want to bother. She decided to cook up a beef stew, which was simple enough, and he was paying her so she didn't mind. As for what Victor was researching was Canis Lycaon's second source. King Lysound, the first werewolf, his entire being had been used alongside the divine sword Ama no Ohabari to make the gear in question. He wanted to find a way to draw out the curse from Canis Lycaon to give himself the powers of a werewolf. Since Lysound was the first werewolf, he would be the most powerful, and Victor had ways to make it even stronger. The divine blood that had infused the divine blood could give him even more strength to surpass his human limitations. He, however, had to balance this with his second sacred gear, so it was going to be a tricky goal to achieve. He sat back as he looked over his notes. Lorna didn't want to interrupt, but she told him the food was ready. The stew is done. He dropped his notebook into his shadow as he stood up. Thanks for doing that. He didn't hate cooking, but it took up his time, so he was glad to have someone else do it for him. Yami jumped off the couch and ran toward the table. Once he sat himself down, Victor sat next to him. Lorna put down 2 bowls for them, but large ones, as they both ate a large amount of food. As for her, she didn't get any as she wasn't hungry. Instead, she just watched as Victor and Yami ate. They sat in silence, and somehow, Yami avoided making a mess at all. Victor eventually spoke up as he decided to go out with it. Lorna, I wanted to ask you something. Would you be interested in learning magic? To be honest, I never thought about it, since being a hero seemed outside my reach. If one had the chance, who wouldn't want to be special? Like the Justice League. They have saved the world many times and many want to be like them. Me included. He nodded as he stood up. The reason I ask that question is because I believe you have the metagene. That gene is why so many people who should be dead instead gain superpowers. It activates when one is subjected to extreme bodily harm and stress. I want to see if Mana can awaken it without putting the individual in severe physical harm. Want to find out? As she looked at Victor, she didn't think twice to accept. Being ordinary in this dangerous world where meta-humans, demons, aliens, gods, and interdimensional monsters ran rampant, being normal was just asking to be killed. I'll do it. With that, he stood up and he walked toward her. Turn around. She did as he said, so he placed a hand on her back. Grit your teeth and clench your butt. Not sure if this will hurt. She did as he ordered, so he released a quick burst of mana into her body. One thing about his mana, as a result of his 2 Longinus and his heavenly restriction, was particularly potent. As such, the wave of mana flowed through her body, making her feel like her entire body was filled with liquid mercury. It wasn't painful, it was just heavy as the mana kickstarted her own. Not just that, as it flowed through her body, Victor's theory about the metagene reacting with outside stimuli was correct. He pulled his hand away and he watched as mana from the air began to enter Lorna's body. Her hair began to turn green along with her eyes. Yami and he watched as the process started, but it ended before her hair turned fully green. When the process ended, Lorna turned around and watched as a green-hued aura flowed around her. How do you feel? She reached up and touched her head. It's weird, I can feel something flowing through my body. Mana, I think, and I can feel it in the air too. It's everywhere, but that is not all. I can feel something else in the air, fields of energy. Magnetism. You can control magnetic fields, and how this will react with mana I am not sure. All I can say is, you are going to be a good student. Want to see how far your power can go? She smiled as she looked up at him. Having powers was like a dream come true. First, she was struggling to make ends meet with her older father, and now she could become a hero. It seemed meeting Victor was the best thing that could have happened to her. I do. He smiled as he extended his hand. Well then, welcome aboard. She then shook his hand, which started her life as a metahuman magic user. After he unlocked Lorna's metapowers, which took the place of her ex gene, she began to learn quickly. Just like Magneto, she could control magnetic fields, which included the control and manipulation of metal and other energy. Now with mana added to the mix, she wouldn't have to deal with a weak body and her powers worked off each other. Just as he said, she kept her powers secret except when he opened bounded fields for her to practice. He didn't let her come with him at night as he felt it was too soon and she obeyed his instructions. She just kept on practicing in secret with Victor's supervision, and as time passed her hair turned fully green. Her control over magnetic fields increased with constant practice, and Victor even taught her simple spells. The most important were bounded fields, which were crucial to remain hidden. Once she could open one, he took her out with him and she had such an easy time dealing with the criminals of the night by tying them up with metal she drew out of the ground. Her magnetism let her turn their own guns into chains, which caused another headache for the CCPD in the morning. Though, there was one problem Victor didn't take into account. Criminals to fight in Central City were drying up as they were starting to leave the city or were already dealt with. As Iris had said, Central City became one of the safest cities around during the day and night. No criminal could escape its protectors, the Flash, Knight, and Hound, and now Polaris, who no one knew about. During this entire time, Victor had continued his own delve into the magical lore in Yami's mind, and he had begun to write down entire books on magic. During this time, Victor delved deep into enchanting and arithmancy to be able to create magic rituals. Through this, he began to enchant his own clothing to make it self-cleaning, self-repairing, and more durable as a second layer of defense. He also did this for Lorna, which she greatly appreciated. To increase his security, he began to place enchantments and magic wards on the house. He did this to keep both ghosts and scrying eyes from gazing at him. In the ward, he made it so only those he invited could enter, and those trying to break in would face severe repercussions from the wards. Through this, he added a space expansion spell to increase the overall size of the house, and he even set up a magic library where he could conduct his magic research and a ritual room in case he decided to use any of the rituals he would create in the future. Lorna even moved out from her dad's house, saying she was staying with a roommate in her grandma's house. While doing this, Victor added a basement which he reinforced and expanded to be a place where he could open a bounded field for training or sparring. With the house warded and protected from magical and mundane threats, they were almost impossible to find. In this way, 4 months passed by in the blink of an eye, with Central City changing with the added protection. Now in early October, Central City, which was located in Ohio, was starting to get cold. Especially in the early morning and late night when the temperatures could drop to below 40 degrees. Today, Iris West Allen, working still for the Daily Planet, made her way to work. Today she was going to publish another piece on the Knight and Hound, who had become adored heroes in Central City. While their methods were more brutal and less flashy than the Flash, they got things done. Crime was at an all-time low, people went out at night without fear, and drugs and violent crime were done. Barry had yet to find anything, and he had talked about it to the League, but since Victor hadn't yet killed anyone that they knew of, they just saw it as Central City gaining another protector. Iris sighed as her pieces on Night were very popular, but she would do anything to get an interview. She had several on the Flash, who just so happened to be her husband, which made her pieces explode in popularity. She even put that in her piece in the hope that Night read it. Getting an interview with the Shadow of Central City would be just as great. As she was walking to work, something big began to run toward her. She turned her head and she saw a huge black dog jump at her. "Ah!" she screamed as the massive dog tackled her to the ground before he started slobbering all over her face. Her makeup got ruined and she had to push him off as he was heavy. "Ha ha ha, stop, I give up." Eventually, the dog got off her and sat himself down waiting for her. Iris got up off the ground, running her hand through her face to get the slobber off. "My makeup and hair are ruined." As she got up, she looked at the dog that tackled her. He was gigantic, at least 200 pounds, covered in a shaggy coat of black and silver fur. His eyes were blood red and it seemed he had a glowing red gem in his forehead. The more she looked at the dog, the more she felt it looked wrong. It looked like a dog, acted like a dog, but the more she looked at it, things felt weird. Yami proceeded to dig his entire head into his shadow, which made Iris feel her heart sink into her stomach. She hadn't even noticed that she got pulled into a small bounded field, but when she looked up, everyone was gone and the sky was purple. She began to get really scared, but when the dog pulled his head out, he had a letter in his mouth. He walked toward Iris and handed it to her. Iris looked at the letter in the dog's mouth with apprehension. "Is that for me?" Yami nodded before extending it toward her again. She took the letter and looked at what was written on the front. From Knight and Hound to Iris West Allen. When she looked at Yami, he nudged her leg with his nose. She gasped as she pointed at him. "Your Hound." She didn't expect him to answer, but he nodded. Iris opened the letter and began to read it out loud. Since no one was around, she didn't have to worry. "Dear Iris West Allen, if you are reading this letter, it means my Hound has found you. I read your piece on us and I can say I liked it. You are a fair reporter, that is why I decided to extend this offer to you. In your piece, you asked for an interview. I am willing to give it to you as I believe it will help me in my goal. My goal is to join the Justice League to save more people, not just those living in Central City. If you wish to get that interview, go to Central City Park at 10 p.m. today. Signed, Knight and Hound." When she read this, Iris felt her heart began to beat like crazy. This was the interview she had been looking for. When she looked at the dog, he seemed pleased to have delivered his letter. Bark. With that bark, the bounded field began to come down, and before Iris could say anything else, Yami dove into his shadow. Iris wanted to say more, but the bounded field was down and she was back on the street. Not just that, the letter in her hand burst into flames, reducing it to ash. Iris let it go as that happened, but she began to rush to get to work. She had an interview to prepare for. 3 comments 0 vote. A promised interview and a new partner. While Yami was delivering his letter, Victor sitting inside his library where he had several shelves of magic books he had written. Most of them were transcribed from the memories of magic users Yami had been bound to. To prevent them from being read without the proper authorizing, they were enchanted to destroy themselves if anyone touched them that was not him. There was just one problem that Victor had with the memories of Yami. Most sacred gear users never went far, as it took someone truly talented to reach balance breaker and beyond. The Longinus were miraculous and powerful, but if the individuals didn't push themselves they wouldn't gain anything. As such, throughout the centuries since Canis Lyakin was made, many of its users simply died before they unlocked the gear, never awakened it, or if they did unlock it were killed before they could rise. However, in the centuries Yami had experienced, he had some truly powerful hosts. Most obviously had been powerful swordsmen fighting up close rather than with magic, but a few had been powerful sorcerers. One of these had been a mad collector of magic lore by the name of Balur the Mad. He was both a mighty warrior with Lycaon at his side and a mage with a desire for knowledge. He had researched not just human magic, but even devil magic, Norse magic, fairy magic, dark and white magic, and fallen magic. That had been a gold mine of magical lore of multiple factions which had grown Victor's magical knowledge by leaps and bounds. As a mage, Balur had been incredible and his skill with his axe staff had been the stuff of legend. At one point, Balur had even found a dark tome in the tomb of an ancient wizard. Balur, like many other sacred gear holders, had one problem: he was still human. He had no desire to join a peerage or rely on others, so Balur decided to create a ritual to grant him immortal life. His ritual involved the sacrifice of an entire town in Germany, which caused Odin to dispatch Thor himself to stop him. Despite his great power, Balur was killed, causing Yami to lose one of his favorite partners. There were several other stories like this of powerful individuals who had been killed before they could reach the peak. None had ever joined a peerage, as most Longinus users had no desire to serve devils. As Victor was writing in a journal with a complete ritual he created based on everything he had learned in the last 6 months. It contained parts of human, devil, Norse, fairy, dark, and white runes and glyphs in it. It was a ritual he had been working on piece by piece to create the perfect way to turn him into a werewolf using the pure curse of lycanthropy of Lysound, the divine power bound to Ama no Ohabari. In Shinto mythology, Ama no Ohabari was not just a divine sword, but a Tatsuka no Tsurugi, or a blade that had achieved its own divinity. In essence, it had become a god in the form of a sword. The problem was that when the sword was merged with King Lysound with his curse of lycanthropy, caused the sword's divinity to turn into a curse. A curse on the level of divinity which caused the blades produced by Lycoan to carry this curse. That was why the blades could cut through nearly anything, but on top of that the blood of Kagu-Tsuchi, the Shinto god of fire and destruction. His Dea at the hand of the divine sword had infused this power into the sword, which created the cursed flames. His goal was to become a werewolf by using the pure curse of lycanthropy of Lysound, enhanced by the divine now cursed energy in Ama no Ohabari, further enhanced by the innate holiness in Incinerate Anthem. Something like a werewolf Nephilim of both cursed and holy energy, or something of the sort. As he was thinking this, Yami jumped out of the shadows at his side. Victor glanced over at the dog with a smile. Did you drop off my letter? Yami nodded with a pleased smile on his face. Victor smiled as he tossed a dog treat from the jar of dog treats next to him. Thanks. Victor closed his book before he sealed it by surging his mana into the book, causing the enchantment on it to activate. He then put it in the proper spot on his shelf. He then got up from his chair before he left his library, followed by Yami. When he left, the door closed by itself before the many wards and enchantments he placed in his library activated to protect his knowledge. With his library protected, he and Yami made their way downstairs to the now much larger house thanks to the enchantments and space-expanding wards. Lorna was already downstairs sitting at the table eating some breakfast. When she saw Victor, she lowered her head. Good morning, sir. He nodded as he sat down at the table. Good morning to you as well. Lorna, remember what I said about joining the league? I think we have a chance now, but first I want to get my words out to the public. That is why later today, I am going to give an interview to Iris West, a reporter for the Daily Planet. The wife of Barry Allen, also known as the Flash. Lorna blinked a few times as he had never told her that. You know who the Flash really is? He smiled as he decided to give her another eye-opener. Would you believe that Bruce Wayne is Batman? She scoffed. As if, how can a billionaire, playboy like Wayne be Batman? Victor smiled as he let her think about it. Lorna then began to think of the Batmobile, the Batwing, the Batcycle, and all the fancy gadgets and the Robins. Whenever Bruce adopted a new kid, Batman always showed up with a new Robin. Oh my god, Batman is Bruce Wayne. He laughed as he knew every single Justice League member's real identity. I know all of them. Keep that to yourself or don't. Use it as blackmail if you want. Until then, want to come with me? Lorna nodded. I don't mind. What superhero name should I take? She hadn't thought that far after all. Gaining superpowers had made her mundane life so much better that she didn't think about it. Polaris or Magnet Queen, she cringed at the second one. Polaris sounds good. He nodded as he stood up as he wasn't hungry. All right then, the interview is at 10 p.m, until then, do whatever you want. As for Iris, after she got to work, she had just been restless for her interview. While a part of her wanted her to tell Barry, he would worry, so she decided to not tell him. Instead, she spent the day writing up her piece on Knight and Hound. She was the first person to get a clear look at Hound, as no camera had ever seen him before. All who had seen him had done so when he was wearing armor, so she described it a bit in her article. She was definitely going to get a promotion for being the first to interview Knight himself. As she was writing, her friend turned to her as she noticed her smile. What has you so chipper? Iris smiled as she didn't want to give out her secret. Oh, nothing. Barry is taking me to Costa Rica. Her friend, Maria, smiled at her. Barry is so good to you. Wish my husband would do that. Iris smiled as she got to go everywhere she wanted through Barry's speed. I know, he is the love of my life. With that, she got back to writing and to prepare for her interview. Until the agreed upon time, Victor kept himself busy by working on his ritual. As he locked himself in his library, in his chair, Yami kept him company. He wrote in more journals as he wrote down his thoughts on his two sacred gears. He was going to keep working in silence when he heard a voice call out to him. Hold on there. He jumped a bit as he had not expected that. Victor sighed as he glanced at the silver cross hanging from his neck. He knew it came from the cross. You damn near gave me a heart attack, and it is about time you talked. Fair, but this is the first time Incinerate Anthem has been bound permanently to a host. You just happen to be strong enough to rouse me from my half-awake state. I sometimes hated this stupid sacred gear that kept jumping from host to host before it could truly grow. He nodded as he grabbed Incinerate Anthem around his neck. That sounds roof. You have a name. For a few moments, she kept quiet as if remembering something she hadn't told anyone in centuries. Gardenia, the Seraph Gardenia. If you do not mind, can you channel some mana into the cross around your neck? This is the first time the gear is a solid thing and I welcome it. Since he was holding it already, he did as she asked and he fed the cross a large amount of mana. When he did so, it glowed brightly before a bright light emerged from it. That light took the form of a beautiful blonde angel wearing a blindfold with a golden halo above her head. Image here. Gardenia wore golden armor, which was quite revealing if he was being honest. She was like a ghost, there and yet not there. Purple fire seemed to burn across her body like a coating. She stretched out before she floated close to his face. This projection won't last long. I saw your plan and I can say that it needs a bit of work. Now that you are stronger, you should consider trying to add angelic power to your werewolf ritual. Of course, with how powerful the curse placed on Lysound by Zeus is, it won't be easy, so you will probably turn into a fallen werewolf or maybe not. Interested? He nodded. Anything to gain more power. She smiled. Good. Until then, I am going back to sleep. It's not easy for me to stay awake. With that, her projection returned to incinerate Anthem. This was the first time she had spoken, which, just as she said, meant his power was rising to a point she could maintain awareness. He did wonder why she was merged with the gear, as it seemed like a punishment rather than a boon. He decided to not question it as he returned to his studies. Later that day, when the time came, Iris made her way toward Central City Park. Going out at night used to be a bit risky at times, but now, no one dared to cause trouble or commit a crime after dark. That was when Night and Hound prowled and the common people loved their nighttime guardians. As she walked toward the park, she began to ponder what questions she wanted to ask. She had so many that they kept jumping in her mind. She was so excited that she almost ran to the park. When she arrived, she simply sat down on a bench to wait. She glanced at her watch, which showed that it was 9:56 p.m. She sighed as she watched the seconds and minutes count down until her alarm went off at 10 exactly. She glanced around and up, expecting Night to jump down. Unlike what she expected, Lorna, wearing a green armored suit covering her face and physical features, flew down from the sky. She landed in front of Iris before asking her a question. Are you Iris West? Iris blinked a few times before nodding. That is me. Lorna nodded. He will see you now. In the past 4 months, Lorna had come a long way, and she had learned not just how to make bounded fields, but also how to teleport. Under their feet, a bright green teleport circle opened under their feet, which teleported the both of them to Victor's house in a flash of green light. Iris shut her eyes, due to the flash, but when she opened them she found herself sitting on the floor. In front of her was a gigantic man wearing a set of pitch-black armor with a helmet in the shape of a dark hound radiating a dark mist. The armor seemed to be covered in what she could only call magical runes, and arcs of lightning and fire seemed to release from the suit. At his side, the same dog that gave her the letter was sitting there on the floor. She didn't know what to say until Victor spoke. Through the enchantments in his helmet, his voice came out much deeper, like a growl and roar mixed together. Welcome, Miss Iris. I am Night, as the people of Central City have come to call me. Though, I prefer the name Valerian, the Knight of Shadows. Iris got to her feet and pulled out her notepad. She wrote it down before she decided to ask the first thing on her mind. Not to question you, but where am I? You are in my study, somewhere hidden away from prying eyes. Now, you had questions. Ask them. Iris cleared her voice as she got started. My first question is, why did you decide to fight crime, and why Central City? Victor nodded as his berserker armor tooth maw snapped its teeth. When I gained my powers, I decided to follow the example of the Justice League and fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. Why have all this power if I can't help anyone with it? Iris wrote this down before she asked a more sensitive question. It has been noted that the way you stop criminals is quite brutal. Most end up in the hospital for an extended stay, and some have been mutilated. Like the man on the east side. Did you regret such an action? Victor shook his head. I do not regret my actions. That creature tried to force himself on a young boy no older than 14. If he had gone to jail, he would have been released in less than 5 years, so I delivered vengeance to him and kept him from harming another child again. Iris nodded as she wrote all this down. Now, I wanted to ask this for my article. Do you know how you got your powers? Are you a metahuman, a magic user like Zatanna or Dr. Fate, from another dimension, or an alien? He chuckled as he leaned forward. I am not a metahuman, as you say. I am a magic user. My apprentice here, on the other hand, is a metahuman. Iris then glanced over Lorna, then at Yami, who was wearing his armor except his armor. I see, and your dog, the famous hound. What is he? Yami grinned as Victor explained. Ah, the real question. Yami is a hybrid of a black dog and a hellhound. As my familiar, he gained my natural gift for the darkness like myself. This was a lie, as it was the other way around. Lycown gave him shadow powers. Iris devoured all of this before she decided to ask something. Now, I will ask this question that many ask themselves. Why the armor? I am not going to lie that it does not inspire hope like most heroes' outfits do. Do you think it is too dark? Victor tapped his clawed gauntlet on his chair before he answered. That is merely the nature of my power. My main power is the darkness and the suit I wear was created to enhance that. Iris nodded before she asked something else. Now, why have you not revealed yourself to the League or the Flash before? Did you not care about the spotlight or is there something else? Did you just feel happy to do good with no fame? Victor answered honestly, I didn't reveal myself as I have been in seclusion to better master the magical arts and my abilities. Now, I feel it is time to extend myself to meet the Flash, Central City's first protector. Would you deliver this message for me, Miss West? She nodded as she thought he meant in an article. Of course, the Flash will love to meet you. Victor stood up to his full height, which in full armor was 6 feet 9. I meant to your husband, Barry Allen. The Flash. I know he is the Flash. Iris felt her heart sink. She was going to ask how, but he just raised a hand. No need for alarm, the secret is safe with me. I found out through magic scrying, finding out was easy. Now then, do you have any more questions for me, Miss West? Or for my apprentice? Iris shook her head. No, I think I will stop here. He nodded. I look forward to reading your article, Miss West. May you have a lovely night. Oh, before I forget, I have something else to say. I would be willing to meet the Flash in front of the people of Central City. I will answer more questions before I extend my request for League status. Is this fair, Miss West? Since Valerian as Victor had taken to calling himself wanted to join the Justice League, he would keep the secret. Yes, I will tell my husband. Victor nodded. I appreciate this, may you have a lovely evening, Miss West. With that said, Victor waved his hand, and in a burst of shadows, Iris found herself back in Central City Park. She sighed as she needed to write this article and tell Barry about her meeting with Valerian. Plus, the fact that his secret identity had been found out too. How would he react? Not well, probably. 29 comments, 0 vote. Protecting the mind. When Iris finally got home, Barry was already home. As a member of the Justice League and a hero, he used to have very few chances to relax. However, ever since Victor set up shop in Central City, he had more free time. Especially at night and at the League meetings, he had told Batman that Central City had its own nighttime protector. Bruce of course had just grumbled as he so often did. If he had one problem with night was merely his heavy hand on those he stopped. As he thinking that, Iris practically threw the door open before slamming it behind her. She wanted nothing more than to get to writing, but before she did, Barry decided to try to calm her down. Iris, you look like you drank Batman's coffee and he drinks a lot of coffee. What has you in such a rush? Iris turned to Barry before she pushed him back down. He complied as Iris wasn't usually so excited, so he smiled as she had a big smile on her face. Come on, tell me already. Iris fell onto the couch next to him before handing Barry her notepad. Barry, you are not going to believe this. I just got an interview with Knight. He even told me the name he prefers and he answered so many questions. Barry blinked a few times as he didn't expect that. Wait. Knight talked to you. He even gave you an interview. Why? How? He has been a shadow for the last 5 months. No pictures other than word of mouth and descriptions, and he shows up to you in person for an interview. Why you? Iris smiled as she explained, trying to leave the matter of his identity for last. Well, ever since he showed up in Central City I have done a few articles on him, his activities, and the effect he has had on Central City. In each I left a message asking for an interview so that the people of Central City could know their new hero's thoughts. Then, as I was walking to work, this huge black dog tackled me and gave me a letter he pulled from his shadow. When I opened it, it was an offer for an interview with Knight. He set up a meeting in Central City Park, and then a woman in green flew down from the sky. She asked me if I was Iris, and then she teleported me to his location. Apparently, she is his apprentice or something. I didn't ask her any questions, just him. I got to ask him plenty of questions and I can say the sketches don't do him justice. He is terrifying. He looks like a more medieval Batman, but instead of a bat theme, he has a dog theme going. Iris suddenly froze as she forgot to get a picture. Damn it, I forgot to ask for a picture to prove it. Iris fell onto the couch as it would be hard to prove she did. It was her word against everyone else. Barry began to read her questions and the answers Knight, no Valerian, gave her. As he read through them, he began to build a profile through his Speed Force enhanced brain. From what Valerian said, he at the minimum believed that his actions were for the good of the people. That was when Iris took a deep breath before turning to Barry. Barry, I need to tell you the truth. Valerian, he knows who you are. He came to me because he knew I was the wife of the Flash. Barry squinted his eyes as that was not good. How did he know? Iris remembered what Balerion told her. Magic scrying, that is what he said. I also got to ask if he was a meta, alien, or demigod, but he said he was a magic user. Barry groaned as magic users were a problem, at the worst of times. Annoying at the best of times, Constantine was a good example. A homo magi, I will ask Zatanna when I see her about them. Anything else? She nodded. He wants to meet you, in front of a press conference in front of the people of Central City. He also wants to join the Justice League. Barry didn't think of that one. A conference in front of the people he has protected. They will cheer for him, and the public opinion of him on the internet is positive. Seeing him out the shadows will drive his approval even higher. I'll have to meet him then. Did he tell you how to contact him? Iris shook her head. No, at the end he just teleported me back to the park. Barry was happy for her as this article was going to make her more popular, but he had to tell her something. Iris, you put yourself in danger. You should have told me so I could have kept an eye on you. Iris knew he would worry, but it wasn't that big a deal. It's fine, Barry, and I was perfectly safe. Since she was here, she was safe, but what if Balerion wasn't as good as he let on? What if you weren't? Iris was going to retort, but she had nothing. Sorry. Barry shook his head. You don't need to apologize, I am just worried for you. I am just glad you are back safe and sound. For now, let's just wait until he contacts us again. As for Victor, after he teleported Iris back home he waved his hand and the set of armor he was wearing began to shift as it retreated back into his shadow. This was a set of shadow armor he had heavily enchanted to become permanent. He was much better at shaping shadows than he was light. Light was much more obvious and less secretive. He still had to practice with light constructs as some enemies would have a weakness to light and holy energies rather than darkness and curses. When he removed his armor, Lorna's mask turned to metallic dust that merged with the rest of her armor. Sir, what are your plans now? He motioned for her to follow him as he made his way out of his study. As I said, I will hold a press conference where I will answer the questions of the press, even the annoying ones, where I will meet the Flash in person. Later, we can talk about gaining league status or at the minimum meeting the other members of the league. Gaining league status will give me access to the many battles the league faced against the threats against the world. Of course, my true goal is to one day gain access to other dimensions and Earth so I can continue my journey of self-improvement. In this dangerous reality, the only way to thrive is to continue to improve. Take this to heart, Lorna. I understand, sir. He nodded as he and Yami made their way upstairs toward his room. As he made his way to his room, Lorna waved before she went downstairs to her own room. At times, she thought Victor, who was the same age as her, was dedicated to his craft. She hadn't seen him not studying or practicing his magic, as it was both his lifeline and his hobby. When she got into her room, she closed the door before she decided to go to bed after taking a shower. Knowing Victor, he would stay up all night researching his magic most likely. She was right, as when Victor got into his room, he instantly sat himself down on his bed. Yami jumped onto his lap, no longer as easy as the dog had reached his full size. He was gigantic, bigger than most wolves. However, right now, Victor closed his eyes as he activated a useful spell he had created for his own use. The mechanized mind spell turned off his emotions, which left his mind fully dedicated to his task. It also sped up the speed of his thoughts by feeding more magic into his brain. Once his mind and emotions were dealt with, he began to focus on entering his own mind, not his soul. Once he was here, he began to relieve his memories, which were far less extensive than before. He had given these memories up completely, and who these people were was wiped from his mind. When he thought back, he could see himself at school, home, and someone who should have been there had just vanished. It was depressing at times, but it was for the best. He sat himself down inside his mind before he clasped his hands together. He then began to gather his most important memories, that of his magics, his transmigrated status, Eldir, his sacred gears, and his knowledge of the events of the DC universe. These memories were the truly important ones and could not leave the confines of his mind. Thanks to the pressure placed on his soul by having 2 Longinus and his increasing quantities of mana, his mind was very powerful. With his most important memories close to his heart, his less important ones were still secured. He then began to construct wards in his mind, making use of occlumency, which was inspired by Harry Potter to protect his mind from mind readers. His first step was warding his mind from intrusion. He began to reinforce the walls of his mind, and the way he did this was by making use of his two sacred gears. With a flex of his will, the walls of his mind began to surge with flame. Two types of fire to be exact, the cursed flames of Canis Lycaon and the holy fire of Incinerate Anthem. These two flames surged across the walls of his mind until every inch was covered in their burning touch. Yet, they caused no harm to Victor's mind since they didn't burn his soul, which was normally more delicate than the mind. He then snapped his fingers and the burning flames began to merge, as in his mind he didn't have to follow logic. Through this method, the black and purple flames merged together into an ominous dark purple flame, which then began to turn solid. This material began to cover the walls of his mind, which added a layer of security. He waved his hand and warding runes, glyphs, and curses began to be carved onto the inside of his mind, meaning a mind reader would need to face the enchanted walls of holy cursed material to get into his mind. That and the many curses he placed on the walls which would retaliate if someone tried. With the walls of his mind complete, he then focused on the next section of his mind. With the walls complete, he focused on the internal sections of his mind. In case anyone got inside his mind, he wanted guards to protect him. He snapped his fingers, causing his mental energy to begin to drop as he created the second layer of defense. This took the form of an army of shadow-armored angels and golden-armored angels. The dark angels were led by a dark ominous angel that looked more like a dementor or a fallen angel, while the second looked divine in nature. Its white and gold radiated a constant light. Victor waved his hand in the sky, forming two suns, one pitch black in nature as he based it on the cursed flames of Lycaon, and a bright purple sun based on the holy fire of Incinerate Anthem. These two suns caused his guards to draw in the power of their respective stars. The two leaders took their positions in front of their sun to observe for intruders in the mind of Victor. With his mind protected from entrance and guarded by a force of angels, he created the main mind palace to store his memories. Using his remaining metal energy, he brought up a gigantic fortress. It was made of blackened steel, surrounded by towering walls, and the army of shadow and light angels flew toward the fortress to protect it. As they began to take their places, he snapped his fingers and large black and white winged wolves began to prowl the fortress itself. He would expand on it when his mental energy recovered, but for the last part, he entered the center of the fortress where he set up the throne room at the very center of the fortress. Here, he placed a large throne which, when he sat in, began to draw in all his memories. His mental protection took shape as his consciousness returned to his body. When he was back, he reached up with an extreme headache as his actions had drained his mental energy to set up his mental shields. He fell onto his bed with Yami curling up next to him. He was quite proud of his defenses, but they would need more work to complete them properly. For now, his mind was safe from mind reading or brainwashing from most. His mental wards could be enhanced as he grew more knowledgeable and stronger. With his goal complete, he closed his eyes and got to sleep. His mental energy would recover in his sleep faster after all. 15 comments 0 vote. Transcendence. Victor over the course of 7 days continued to work on mental defenses, completing the fortress and his mind palace. As a result, every single memory he still had was his mind, and by combining it with his mechanized mind spell, his mind was running at a speed it could not before. As a result, his mind's ability to weave magic had gotten elevated to a new level. At that time, Iris had completed her article, which spread like wildfire among the citizens of Central City. With Barry's speed force, Iris was able to create a perfect sketch of Balerion as he had told her. She had added it to her article, and this caused so much discussion on the internet. Of course, there were a few trolls here and there who refused to believe Iris had met with Knight. They called her sketch fake and she was just making it up. Even with that, Iris did in fact get her promotion at the Daily Planet. However, her boss did ask her if she go to another interview to get a picture at least. Regardless, Iris was pleased with her article and getting the word out of the thoughts of Central City's nightly protector. As for that protector, he was currently in his ritual room with help from Gardenia, a seraph who had been alive in heaven when God still lived. She knew much and her help with his ritual was greatly appreciated. Once he completed his mind palace, the speed of his thoughts had been elevated so he could see the flaws in his ritual circle, which he fixed. Gardenia at the same time taught him some of the angelic magic and runes which he needed to add to his ritual to balance out the devil runes. Of course, that caused its own set of issues, which meant his ritual needed a total overhaul and it had grown in complexity. The issue was that casting it was going to need a ludicrous amount of magic to fuel it. As such, he had to create a completely different magic ritual that would condense magic into mana crystals. Mana crystals would help feed the ritual circle when it was time to cast it. Victor stood over the ritual he carved in the ground from his own blood. He didn't have any magical plant ingredients that could sustain a magic ritual, so his blood had to do. Gardenia, who was floating by Victor's left side, glanced at the magic array they constructed before nodding. She nodded to herself, but he did wonder how she saw out of her blindfold. This will do. However, if you had magical herbs to make a proper ritual focus, it'd be better. But your own blood will work. Yami sniffed the circle before he stepped away from it. Victor smiled as he began to feed the magic circle with his mana. As the lines and runes he created began to light up, he observed as his own mana and mana from the air began to be drawn into the magic circle. Victor, Yami, and Gardenia watched as the circle began to condense the mana drawn into it into a single point. That point of mana grew larger and more concentrated until it became a drop of liquid mana. After a few more moments, more and more liquid mana was gathered before the circle concentrated it into a solid crystal of mana. Victor released a breath he had been holding before he picked up the mana crystal. All that work for this tiny thing. Gardenia knew it was annoying, but it was what they had to do. At least you can use the same circle over and over. Though, I would suggest building a magic array around the house to draw in more magic. Later, you can move the entire house directly over a ley line to have access to more magic. Victor sighed as he decided to suck up his irritation to continue to gather more mana crystals. He would need plenty to feed his ritual as it was going to take a lot of mana. Though he did congratulate Gardenia on her ability to remain awake. I should say you are looking much more awake than before. She nodded. That is thanks to you, your progress has been swift. Though, I will remind you that you have yet to bind a powerful soul to the cross. As you know, the sacred gear binds a powerful soul to itself to draw on its power. Victor knew that was a problem, just that strong souls were not common. I know, but unlike Dragon Deus, powerful souls are not so common or easy to acquire to me right now. I would be going to the Fair Lands, my work would be much easier. I could find supernatural creatures with powerful souls, like dragons or other magical creatures. It's not like I can just He stopped talking as he knew of one place on Earth with a powerful magical presence. Transylvania, in Romania. It is a place teeming with dark-aligned creatures, werewolves, vampires, and other such creatures. If I can find a powerful vampire or other supernatural creature, I can bind their soul to incinerate Anthem. Gardenia nodded. You should prepare for that, and remember incinerate Anthem can bind more than one soul to it and you can replace them as your power grows. With that, Gardenia returned to the cross around his neck. With her gone, he continued to use the magic array to continue to create more mana crystals. After he created another 5, he dropped them into his shadow to keep them secured. He then took it easy as his mana recovered before he used it again later that day to make another 5. Over the next few days, in which he didn't even leave the house to fight crime, he continued to make more mana crystals for his major ritual. Instead, he sent out Yami and Lorna to keep an eye on things at night. They practically didn't need to do anything as just his name kept the remaining criminals in check. In that time, thanks to his continued efforts, he managed to convince nearly 120 magic crystals. It was a big amount and he felt was enough, but he took more time to increase his amount to 150. When he had the mana crystals he needed, he felt it was time to use the ritual he had painstakingly reworked many times to get the desired result. He had waited until the day that the moon was going to turn full for the most spiritual intent. Inside his ritual room, he removed the ritual for making mana crystals as he could always replace it when his living situation got better. While Yami and Gardenia watched, he began to draw the ritual circle into the ground in his own blood. Gardenia floated by his side as she allowed him to work in peace. They didn't have Lorna here as while she could use magic she wasn't nearly as talented in it as Victor. When the entire ritual array was complete, Victor looked it over almost 5 times making sure each rune, glyph, line, and piece was perfect. I got it done. Gardenia used her projected nature to fly over it using her expertise to discern the ritual's quality. After not finding a single mistake she nodded as it would work perfectly. It's ready. Victor waved his hand and from his shadow emerged the 150 mana crystals he had painstakingly created. He placed them down onto the circle which would be the fuel needed for the spell to work. He then looked over at Yami who was going to be crucial for his. You ready my friend? Yami nodded as he walked over to his place in the magic circle. The ritual would not hurt Yami or damage him, but it would leave him a bit drained until his power recovered. The sacred gear had been pushed hard before, and it always recovered. Yami was willing to do this as the stronger Victor got, the stronger he would become. With Yami in place, Victor walked over to another part of the ritual before he reached up and removed Incinerate Anthem from around his neck. He then placed it down on the circle before he added the last part of the ritual. He created 2 swords, one made of solid shadow and the second made of solid light. With the swords complete, he stabbed them into the middle of the ritual circle. That was everything he needed, so he looked over at Yami. "You ready?" Yami nodded with determination. Victor then looked over at Incinerate Anthem on the floor. "How about you, Gardenia? Not nervous?" "Not at all. The Longinus will not break that easy, they are self-sustaining and will recover in time. Besides, as long as you remain human with a limited lifespan, you are at risk. Without the sacred gear system, our lives are bound to yours, so grow strong enough to protect it." With that, he nodded as he walked forward to start the ritual. He began to feed his mana into the ritual circle, which caused the blood he drew it with to start drawing in a titanic surge of his mana. As he focused, he saw it began to devour the energy in the mana crystals, which directed the mana into each portion of the circle. The runes and glyphs around Yami and Incinerate Anthem lit up as it began to feed their power toward the 2 swords in the middle. From Yami, 3 things flowed into the center of the circle into the black sword. The lycanthropy curse of Lysound began to surge out of Yami, which didn't feel all that comfortable. On top of it, the divine power of the Shinto god Kagutsuchi, which had been killed by the divine sword Ama no Ohabari, which had drunk his divine blood into itself. The third was the former divinity, now a curse from the blade itself, which all flowed into the dark shadow sword, which drank this power along with the vast amounts of mana offered to it in the circle by the mana crystals. From Incinerate Anthem, the innate holy energy granted to the cross by the blood of Christ flowed into the light sword, and the power of Gardenia as a seraph, which had been enhanced by the fusion with the cross. With each second that the magic circle burned, the mana crystals crumbled to dust as their energy was devoured one after the other. All this power was directed into the twin swords of darkness and light, which began to be pulled together. Victor could see how Yami grit his teeth as this was becoming unbearable. Gardenia was probably in the same boat, but the mana crystals were crumbling to dust. Already, more than half of them were gone, and even then more and more of them followed suit. Their energy continued to flow into the 2 blades, which burst into a burning black and red flame along with a white and purple fire. These 2 energies flowed into each other, and they devoured all the mana in the crystals as power to finish their merger. When the very last mana crystal burst apart, Victor stopped feeding the magic circle. He fell to his knees, and with that, the 2 blades which had drank deep of his 2 sacred gears consolidated into one. In their place, a pitch-black longsword flowing with white, purple, black, and red lines. It radiated a vast aura of holiness, curses, divinity, and destruction. Yami fell down as he felt drained to the bone. Victor didn't check on the sword first, but he picked up Incinerate Anthem and placed it around his neck. He then walked toward Yami and he picked up the dog into his arms. "How you feel?" Yami snorted and rolled his eyes as he was just tired. Victor smiled as his friend was completely okay. He just needed to rest, so he did the best thing he could. "Return to my soul, both of you. You need rest more than me." Gardenia didn't hesitate. "That is for the best." With that, the silver cross around his neck retreated into his soul, and Yami followed after. His partner closed his eyes as he returned to Victor's soul for recovery. With them resting, he walked toward the sword he created. He reached down and he lifted the sword into his hand. It would be one use and he better make use of it. He squinted his eyes and focused on his remaining mana, and he teleported to the roof of his house. When he arrived on the roof, he looked up at the sky and the moon in particular. It was close to full, and in just a few more moments, it would reach its fullest in about half an hour. As such, he sat himself down and began to focus on recovering his mana. As for the sword in his hands, it continued to radiate a potent aura that he would use soon. Just a few minutes before the moon became full, he rose to his feet as he didn't need to have all his mana for this. Instead, he ripped off his shirt, leaving himself shirtless. He took a deep breath and he pointed the point of the blade toward his own heart. He took a deep breath before he plunged the blade into his own chest. When the sword pierced his heart, he grit his teeth as he pushes it deeper into his chest. When he did so, the power of the blade began to surge into his body. The pure lycanthropy of Lysound enhanced with the divine power of Kagutsuchi, the potent divine curse of Ama no Ohabari, the innate holiness and divinity in the cross, and the angelic power of Gardenia. All this power flowed into him, reminding Victor of Dante stabbing himself with rebellion. Victor released the sword, which caused all the power into it to flow into his heart. Dark black and red lines began to surge across his body alongside purple and white, which seemed to fight against each other. However, they began to harmonize and merge together, causing the lycanthropy curse to take hold. These black and crimson divine and cursed lines covered Victor's entire body, and then the moon became full. When that happened, Victor's body began to tremble as his transformation into a new species commenced. Part god, part angel, part werewolf, cursed and divine all in one. His body began to absorb potent lunar energy, which kick-started his transformation and ascension into his new race. 27 comments, 0 vote. Divine Ascension. When Victor plunged the blade of lycanthropy into his heart, a cocktail of power began to surge into his body. Deep black and crimson veins began to envelop his heart before they surged into the rest of his body. As he expected, the curse of lycanthropy, which had already made Lysoun into the strongest werewolf and the first of his kind, had been greatly refined. After centuries of being fused with Ama no Ohabari, a divine sword that had killed and drank the blood of a god, it had elevated the curse to a divine curse. A divine curse of lycanthropy, and this curse had plenty of fuel. Nearly 150 mana crystals and all their energy was devoured by the divine curse. In this mixture was the angelic power of Gardenia, and the vast holiness contained in the cross due to the blood of Christ. All these different parts came together into a single thing greater than the sum of their parts. This unique bloodline began to take hold of Victor's entire being. All over his body, deep red and black lines began to flow across his skin. Victor's black and blue eyes glanced up at the full moon as vast amounts of lunar energy flowed into his being. Victor's eyes seemed to constrict as blood vessels in his black sclera burst, causing blood to run down his face. Bones and muscles inside his body began to break and tear as they began to grow larger. His very skin seemed to struggle to contain his growing musculature and skeleton as it expanded. Eventually, it began to rip apart, revealing his dark thick hide of a beast. His bones snapped one after the other, and the pain began to increase as his transformation began to take hold. The first transformation was always the most painful, as his entire body had to purge its human limitations. Victor grit his teeth, which begin to grow pointed as a new race begins to take hold. As he looked at his hands, he saw his fingers breaking and his nails beginning to grow into black claws. His back began to twitch and tear, which caused his old human blood to begin to spill out from his open wounds. Something seemed to be trying to force its way out of his skin. Despite the agonizing pain he found himself in, Victor's mind was still not lost. Bring it. He reached up to his own face and dug his claws into his own skin. With a tear, he ripped off his own face, which he dropped onto the ground. It was brutal, but with that, his jaw began to grow longer into a werewolf-like muzzle. His teeth began to grow and warp into razor-sharp fangs, but they began to turn into blackened metal. The power of Canis Lyakin caused his growing fangs to turn into blades with the power of the sacred gear. New skin began to cover his exposed muscle fibers all over his body, replacing his skin. His skin was not weak thanks to his heavenly restriction, but his new werewolf one was even stronger. It had taken what his heavenly restriction gave him and expanded upon it further. Victor grunted as his body continued to tear itself apart, but his new blackened hide continued to stretch over his body to cover up the exposed muscle fibers. His mouth by this point had grown into a large lupine muzzle filled with blackened metal fangs. His ears began to grow larger into large lupine ears, but finally, Victor's back tore open. From his back emerged a gigantic pair of bone wings, and his size increased exponentially until he was standing 20 feet tall. Flesh flowed over his wings, which were huge, perfectly in size with his elevated transformation. Once the bones of his wings were covered, black and crimson feathers began to sprout, seemingly made of metal, covering his new appendages. As the last exposed muscle fiber was covered with black and tough hide, a shaggy coat of black metallic fur sprouted all over his body. However, portions of his coat were covered with bright red lines, reminding him of Gilgamesh of Fate. A sign of divine blood flowed through him, but to finish off his physical transformation, from his lower end 3 large tails sprouted, which began to absorb ambient mana and lunar energy. His 2 large crimson-black feathered wings extended and, much like his tails, began to absorb mana and lunar energy. Victor began to feel his mana began to surge as it began to increase as a result of his new bloodline. He could hold far more mana than before, and his tails and wigs had begun to absorb vast quantities to fill his reserves and feed his bloodline. Victor sat himself down as he focused on this, but something new was beginning to take place in his body. As a result of the divine marks across his body, as a result of absorbing the divine power contained in Incinerate Anthem and Kagutsuchi, he could begin making use of divine energy. Victor relaxed as this divine energy began to flow through his being. From what he could feel, it contained both holy and cursed energies merged into one, and with it angelic power. His theory had been a resounding success. Through his transformation he had merged the powers of two sacred gears. As his divine energy began merging with his mana, it began to flow through his body, into his mind, and especially his soul. When this happened, his soul, which had been split down the middle by the opposite natures of his two Longinus, began to synchronize. This new divine energy flowed into Lycaon and Incinerate Anthem as the power they sacrificed for Victor was returned to them tenfold and with even more. The holy and cursed energies contained in the two hemispheres of his soul began to flow into each other and perfectly merge under the power of his divine energy. No longer would he have to differentiate between holy or cursed, as they were one and the same. Victor rose to his feet as he almost could not help himself. He wanted to howl, but that would be stupid. This divine energy began to nurture the growth of his soul, and with his soul growing, his sacred gears grew, and as they grew he grew. Yami leapt out of Victor's soul, and as this divine energy flowed into him, something happened. The core of his being, the fusion of Ama no Ohabari and Lysound, began to absorb this new divine energy. As that happened, Yami's power as a sacred gear evolved. As his power evolved he had to evolve, and when this happened Yami dog-like features began to transform. Rather than a dog, he became what he should have always been, a wolf. His size increased, his muzzle became larger, and his appearance became that of the black divine wolf. Not just that, he had absorbed the holy and angelic power contained in the divine energy of Victor. As for Incinerate Anthem, the cross once again appeared around Victor's neck, and despite its pure silver material nothing happened to him. As his divine energy flowed into it, Gardenia's soul fed on this power, which her to gain access to divine energy and the cursed power of Yami. As time went on, the flow of lunar energy and mana did not cease, and his tails and wings seemed to absorb even more. All this energy was devoured by his divine energy, as it was a vastly stronger energy. All this energy continued to enhance Victor's new bloodline, his soul and his mind by the second. Victor's soul in particular grew more harmonious as its color became an extremely potent purple color as the holy and cursed energy and power of his two Longinus merged. With his soul becoming stronger and one once more, his two sacred gears moved to the center of his soul. The core of their power came closer together at the very center of his soul. Here they could grow, evolve with Victor under his surge of new power. As for Victor himself, he rose to his full height as his tails and wings would continue to absorb ambient energy, which would then be converted into divine energy by his divine marks. He took a step forward as his wings behind him twitched. His tails flicked back and forth, but he felt something was missing. He squinted his eyes, and all over his body, his new potent blood flowed from his body. This blood contained divine energy, which contained angelic, werewolf, cursed, holy, divine power all in one. It needed a proper name, as his power had risen by many levels by this simple transformation. As such, he decided to call his new bloodline Nephalem Werewolf, as it took many powers to make this unique existence. Plus, this just the lowest levels, as his talent had not suddenly dried up. With his Longinus having evolved alongside him, they would be able to grow further in the future. Blood continued to flow over him before it solidified into plates of metal, forming a new set of armor for himself. With his armor completed, he looked down at the flesh, skin and blood he had discarded. He waved his hand, and all this discarded flesh which could be used against him was removed from the bloody roof. He then did something he didn't want to do, but he opened his mouth and he ate every last trace of his discarded skin and blood. Better than to let Luther or any other moron clone him. With that last disgusting act, he jumped off the roof with Yami leaping down after him. Image here. As for the cross around his neck, it seemed to flow with power. Gardenia emerged from the cross, but she was still immaterial. In terms of appearance she didn't look much different, unlike Yami, but her golden feathered wings seemed more metallic and darker in a few places. I have to say, you look good. For a werewolf, that is. She flew around him to get a look at his large wings, which seemed more like those of a fallen angel. Then she looked down and saw his three large muscular tails, which contained to draw in ambient mana and lunar energy. Are you going to turn into a nine-tail or something? Victor would not mind, as from the more tails he got the more ambient energy he would have access to. If there are nine-tailed foxes, it makes sense that nine-tailed werewolves would be a thing. The process of which I took to become a Nephilim werewolf was extensive, and it seems I have more power to uncover from my new bloodline. Gardenia nodded as she observed him in his totally. How much stronger do you feel? Must be extensive. He raised his right hand and gazed at his armored clawed hand. Like I could fight 50 of my old selves and win. Just the fact I have divine energy flowing through my body and perfectly aligned for my uses. I will have to further study how this new energy reacts with my magic and modify my techniques for the future. I will also have to train to better adjust to my elevated physical ability. He waved his hand and he began to weave mana from the air before he created a bounded field around him. When the field went up, being cut off from the moon didn't weaken him, but he could feel his tails and wings stop absorbing it as they used to. With the bounded field up and running, he could begin to study how his new transformation would change everything. He also felt that Gardenia's theory was correct, that he would eventually become a 9-tailed creature. Did that also mean he would grow more wings? Angels like Gardenia in DxD got stronger the more wings they had, and while he was part angel, did that still apply? He had a lot of questions to answer, so he began to study his new body and power in depth. Becoming a completely new race had to come with new abilities he didn't yet know. 46 comments, 0 vote. An introduction of chance. Once inside the bounded field he created after his complete transformation, he felt odd. He looked at his right hand, which was covered in black plates of metal. The armor was created from his blood and surging with divine energy. He looked down at his claws, which were curved, crimson black, and made of metal. He flexed his fingers and retracted them before he began to move his wrist around. His range of motion in his wrists had increased rather than decreased. This would be quite useful in a sword fight or any kind of fight, as he could spin his hands nearly completely. He looked behind him at his large bladed wings, which flexed and tensed like his own arms. With a thought he retracted them, causing them to disappear. He then brought them back out again, and unlike them coming out, the process was seamless. I like this. His tails twitched separately from each other and they were rather long. Almost 7 feet long, and his armor extended over them. He already knew their main ability was to draw in ambient mana and lunar energy. However, he tensed them, causing their fur to compress and the armor to flex over them. This meant he had gained 3 new appendages that could work as whips, or even hold weapons of their own. When fighting multiple foes, that would help him avoid being overwhelmed. Everything is different. After the transformation, new instincts merged with him to deal with his limbs. His brain itself had been modified to handle the new limbs and to control his new body. He took a deep breath, feeling his senses grow even further than they already were. His tears twitched as he took a sense of his hearing, sense of smell, vision, his sense of touch, taste, and magical senses. They were so much more sensitive he could literally taste the mana in the air. Gardenia and Yami continued to watch as he merely moved his arms, legs, neck and hands. Gardenia floated toward his face, looking at the glowing red eyes. He still had his signature black sclera, just that they were full of crimson veins that pulsed from time to time. Anything feel weird? He shook his head as he opened his hand. Shadows and light flowed together in his hand before a new sword formed. It was a combination of Yami's power to form blades from shadows merged with light magic infused with divine energy. It was similar to Udokiba's demonic holy swords, but rather than demonic energy they used cursed, holy, light and dark. The blades were a dark black, but with a silver edge, and it seemed to drink in light and darkness. Yami and Gardenia observed the new blade, which was stronger than any blade he had produced before. Victor spread his legs apart before he lunged forward, trying to adapt his style to his new form. His weight was more forward-centered now, but his 3 tails made balancing easy. His heavenly restriction hadn't gone away, as the enhanced instincts, physical ability and enhanced senses had merely been enhanced further. Despite his legs being far longer than his human form, his balance was impeccable. The range of motion of his shoulders was increased, meaning he could make attacks he couldn't before. He grinned, which exposed his metal fangs as he spun on his heels and brought his sword down. When he stopped moving, he glanced at the sword in his hand before he released it. It dispersed into motes of light and shadow like all his other weapons. No problems in my swordsmanship, at least. Yami nodded as he had watched the whole thing. Victor was just as good at using his swords as he had been before. Even Gardenia clapped. I will say, your reach, speed, and strength are so much higher that it is unfair. How is your magic? Victor squinted his eyes and he began to experiment with his new divine energy. It was far stronger than mana, and its frequency had changed. He waved his hand and he began to weave together a simple magic circle. It was a fireball, but he used divine energy to make it to see if it affected his spell. When he finished the spell he watched as the fireball was created, but it was so much stronger. The ball of fire was an ominous blackish purple as his divine energy had infused into the spell. He watched as the fireball exploded, unleashing cursed holy fire in a large blast. He waved his hand and he dispersed the flames, which made him happy. He had many more spells to test out and maybe modify since it seemed to not have many problems. However, he had to think of something else, another use of shadows and light that he could control with ease. He raised his hands, causing the shadows to rise into the air. With an infusion of divine energy, the shadow changed shape into that of a large wolf with large wings. It wasn't a real wolf, but rather he could not construct constructs out of shadows. He observed the shadow construct before he waved his left hand and he shaped the light into a wolf-shaped construct as well. He could see much use in this ability. I have so much to learn. Just like you two have to get used to this new state. New problem though, how do we explain you? He pointed at Yami, who had turned into a wolf, as it would be harder than his old dog form. With a smile, Yami turned into shadows before he reverted into his original form. Never mind. Victor focused on himself and he rapidly began to shrink. His armor began to turn back into blood, which flowed back into his body. His muscles and bones began to squeeze down as his massive form shrunk back into his human self. When the process was done, looked down at himself and saw that he was naked. That going be a problem? Gardenia glanced down at his member and gave him a thumbs up. Nice cock. He chuckled as he checked himself out. He was taller, that was for sure, about 2 inches taller, meaning he was now 6 feet 7. As he looked at his body, he found that he was much more muscular. His skin was impossibly tough, meaning it would take quite a bit of effort to damage him. Of course, he wasn't Superman tough, but that could change in time. I think I have an overview on things now. He reached into his shadow and he pulled out some clothes. He began to get dressed, which were a bit tight, but he could just enchant them to change size with him. Enchanting was very useful, not just for protecting your home and making weapons, it also made clothing more convenient. He waved his hand and he brought down the bounded field before making his way toward his house. When he stepped inside, he didn't see Lorna, as he told her to take the day off. He smelled the air and he found her in her room sleeping. He shook his head as he also made his way to his room. He would need time to adapt to all the changes, but today he just wanted to take it easy. After a massive transformation like that, he deserved to take it easy. The days following Victor's transformation were filled with constant training. He had to modify his magics to handle the more potent divine energy that fueled them. He had to modify his swordsmanship to deal with increased flexibility, size, and range as a werewolf. In human form, the change was also similar, as he could rotate his wrists further, extend his claws on command, and transform when he desired. At the same time, Iris finally released her article on her interview with Balerion. She titled it, Central City's Night, and she spoke of her encounter with Central City's enigmatic nighttime protector. She left some things out, but for the most part, the article was honest to what he told her. It exploded in popularity on the internet and more people became curious about Balerion. Of course, some people tried to discredit Iris because some people didn't believe she had a meeting with Night, as people still wanted to call him. They said that the name Balerion was fake and she made it up for attention. Iris defended her article fiercely as it was all true, but without Night to show up for it, she didn't have much proof. Currently, Iris was sitting in her living room with an angry expression on her face. She knew this could happen, but she didn't think it'd be this tricky. Barry glanced at her as some other reporters were adamant she was a liar. Damn it, this is why I wanted a picture, but I was so caught up I didn't get one. What am I going to do? Barry cleared his voice as he asked her something. Have you gotten any more letters? Iris shook her head. Nothing. After talking to Balerion, nothing. It's just so grating. At that moment they heard the doorbell ring. Then they heard what sounded like a dog scratching at the door. Iris jumped up before running to the door and opening it. Standing at the door was exactly who she was hoping to see. Hound, or Yami, was currently in his dog form for ease of travel. Yami stepped right into the house, which made Iris close the door. She followed the large dog before introducing him to Barry. Barry, this is Hound. He is the dog that sent me the letter. Barry reached out with his hand and began to pet Yami, who closed his eyes. So, this is the famous dog the criminals fear. He is cute, though what he can do isn't. Yami's ears dropped as he stepped back. He dug his head into his shadow before he pulled out 2 letters. One he handed to Iris, who opened it up, and one to Barry. When Iris opened the letter, she began to read it out loud. Miss West, I have read your article and I can see it caused problems not to have a photo of me. To fix this, I would like to invite you for another interview. Your husband is welcome, of course. You can take a photo of me for evidence. Consider it a gift. Sincerely, Balerion. Same place as last time, Central City Park, to tonight at midnight. After reading it, she held it out expecting it to explode, but it didn't. She sighed in relief, but at that moment it burst into flames. Damn it, I fell for it again. You hear that, all, Barry? Barry nodded as he looked at Yami, who had just dug his head into his shadow to get the letters. Yeah, I heard. How does that work? He leaned closer as he studied Yami, who was quite friendly to most people. He then opened his own letter, which he read out loud. Barry Allen, also known as the Flash, you have no magical protections against scrying magic, and I would like to offer you some help. When you and Iris arrive at our next interview, I am willing to enchant your Flash suit to increase its ability to hide your identity. It will also make it more comfortable and all around better. Consider it a gift from a fellow hero to keep the people of Central City safe. Barry thought about it as Zatanna and Dr. Fate had never offered to enchant his suit. He also had never asked before, as she didn't think about it, but would that be possible? He would really need to give them a call sometime to ask about why they never offered. Iris glanced over at Barry's letter, which also exploded into flames. Seeing that made Barry shake his head. Iris kneeled down and ran her hand down Yami's head. Thank you. Yami licked her on the face before he jumped into his shadow. When he was gone, Barry was really curious how that worked. He bent down and touched the shadow Yami jumped into and felt just floor. Magic is so weird. So, we are going? Iris nodded. Another interview and a photo this time will shut up all my doubters. That promotion is mine, Barry. Plus, you get to meet Balerion in person. Barry agreed, as that was a big thing. Since he wants to join the league, I will have a talk with him. I will see what he is like. Knowing Bruce, he wouldn't be this amenable. That was true, as Bruce hated other heroes in Gotham. He was territorial for some reason, which is why the league left him alone for the most part. Even if he really needed the help. 24 comments, 0 vote. Meeting the Flash. After sending Yami off to deliver his letter, Victor was currently sitting in his living room. For the most part, he kept to himself except when he was training Lorna, but right now she was right behind him giving him a shoulder massage. She was applying extra pressure by circulating mana through her hands along with her magnetism. Otherwise, Victor wouldn't be able to feel it, since after he had become a Nephilim werewolf, his skin and flesh had become like metal. Right there is good. As Lorna squeezed down on his shoulders, she sighed. You know, when I said I knew how to give massages, that didn't mean I was offering. He smirked as he looked up at the green-haired woman behind him. Really? I asked if you had any other skills and you blurted out that you knew how to give massages. I took that as an offer. She shook her head as she moved down from his shoulders to his back. She pressed down harder since she didn't mind at all. Ever since she met Victor, he had been a good mentor, but he was a loner. Many people on the internet compared his actions to Batman, since they both operated from the shadows with a brutal way of handling criminals. She wondered what the two would say if they met, but before she could ask, they were interrupted. Yami leapt out of the shadows like a fish, landing at Victor's feet. When he did so, his form shifted into liquid darkness before reforming into his true wolf form. When he was back, he jumped up into Victor's lap. He flipped around onto his stomach, so Victor began to scratch his exposed belly. Did you have fun? Bark. Victor nodded as Yami just said that he had a good time. Delivering letters was fun as it made him feel useful. Despite now being a wolf, Yami kept his dog-like dedication at least. Thanks, Yami, you're the best. Lorna at that moment stopped rubbing his shoulders before walking around to stand in front of Victor. So what is the plan this time? Teleport them back here? Victor shook his head as he really wanted this house to remain hidden. Part of him wanted to find a way to create the Fidelius charm from Harry Potter. The ability to hide a place completely was so useful. Since his library of magic was kept in this house, he didn't want it to get out of his control. As such, he was going to further conceal this house through even greater magical means. Nope, I will be going to the park myself. Of course, I will do so in full armor to conceal my identity. I won't be giving it out anytime soon. I will talk to Barry, the Flash, and see what kind of person he is. Plus, who knows, we might even become decent acquaintances. Lorna nodded. Understood. Until then, I will be in my room. Lorna turned around and began to walk up the stairs to get to her room. When she was gone, he leaned back into his chair. He closed his eyes as he began to meditate once again. He once again retreated into his mind to reinforce his mental shields as his power had grown greatly since his transformation. His knowledge was far too valuable to allow powerful telepaths to get to, so his mind needed to be protected. He would continuously reinforce his mind until he would be able to protect his thoughts and memories from everyone. While he padded up his mental defenses, time began to progress. His new divine energy made all his efforts far easier. By mixing the holy and cursed energies into one thing, he didn't have to differentiate from them. When he was done with the reinforcement, he still had several hours till midnight. Victor thought about it before he stood up from his chair with Yami still in his arms. He put the wolf down before he created one of his light shadow swords. He needed to see how his divine energy would work with his enchanting. He would need to practice to change out the wards and magical formations running through his house. He also had to remake his Shadow Berserker armor, as now he could combine light and shadows. He also had to enchant the armor to make it permanent, which just meant he had lots of things to do. I have much to do, but now, time is not an issue. Yami barked as he and Victor got to work on his enchanting work. Just like this, they spent the next hours with Gardenia, who joined them in their research. When the time began to approach midnight, Victor glanced at a dagger he created. It was a large dagger about the size of a man's forearm, and it had runes running through their blade. Lorna had come down to join him since she was his apprentice, and where he went she needed to go. However, when she did so, she saw the weapon he was holding with curiosity. What does that do? He smiled at her before he threw the dagger at her feet. Lorna flinched as it stabbed into her shadow by her feet. Try to walk away from that point. Lorna looked at the dagger stabbing her shadow before she did as he said. However, while she began to get away, she found making distance hard. It was like she was being held back, and the origin of that was the dagger stabbed into her shadow. I call them black keys. Once they stab into the shadow of an individual, they will restrain them to that point. Lorna reached down and grabbed the dagger before she tried to pull it out. However, she found that she was unable to, and that wasn't through physical means. It was pure magic that made Victor smile. He held his hand out, which made the dagger fly back into his hand. These are going to make my future battles far easier. I practically am the shadows, but if I can make your own shadow your enemy, what can you do against me? Lorna shook her head. You get scarier and scarier every day. He smirked as from his shadow a new set of armor he created emerged. It was still a prototype, but much like his swords, it was created through shadows and light and enchanted as well. Like his original set of armor, it was still black, but now it had a silvery shine to it. The enchantments on it were both internal and external, allowing the suit to feed on shadows and light to repair itself. It could absorb impacts and redirect them, absorb magic from the atmosphere, and adapt to battle damage. The armor flowed over his body, slotting onto him piece by piece until his wolf-shaped helmet encased his head. The eye sockets glowed a bright crimson with what appeared to be crimson-black veins flowing through every segment. To complete the set, from his shadow emerged a large broadsword that crackled with lightning. He placed the sword on his back before glancing over at Lorna. What do you think? She walked around him to get a better look at the suit. It feels stronger. That was an understatement, so he decided to not press her. Come on, suit up. You too, Yami. Yami barked as the shadows and light flowed over him before he was encased in armor as well. Once he was armored as well, that just left Lorna, who was already wearing the enchanted armor he made for her. He would need to remake it as he had access to far better materials now. Regardless, when she covered her face, that was all he needed. Let's go. He waved his hand and a large magic circle glowed, a deep crimson engraved with the motif of a winged wolf flashed around them. It teleported them directly to Central City Park, where Victor had asked to meet Barry and Iris. Iris since she was a reporter, and Barry since he wanted to meet a League member and another hero. When they arrived in Central City, they did so away from the center of the park. It was better if they kept a low profile, since thanks to his nightly activities more people came out at night than before. Now, they just had to wait for Iris and Barry, who would be arriving soon. Speaking of Iris and Barry, when the time began to approach the agreed upon time, they left their house together. To speed up the process, Barry picked up Iris, as while the speed force focused on speed, it also increased his strength. Other side, he would not be able to handle the extreme stress of running at his speed could apply to his body. Of course, he never ran at full speed with Iris, but still fast enough to cover quite a distance quickly. That was how he allowed Iris to enjoy different spots around the world on her weekend. No one had to know, so once they reached Central City Park, he stopped in a quiet area to not be watched. Barry quickly put Iris down, who reached into her coat and pulled out her notebook. She also brought her phone to take pictures as she needed real proof this time. Her previous article was questions because of the lack of pictures. Barry looked around and didn't see anything. How do we find him? Iris shrugged. Last time I just sat at a bench and his apprentice flew down to talk to me. Not sure if that is what we are going to do this time. Barry was willing to run around the park at super speed to see if he could find Victor, but he didn't have to. Thanks to his enhanced senses, Victor could quickly spot them, especially Barry since his super speed wasn't exactly quite. He reached out and grabbed Lorna by her arm before he jumped into his shadow. Yami jumped in after him, and after a quick shadow jump, they reached Barry and Iris's location. Victor could easily jump from one of their shadows, but that could be creepy. Instead, he emerged with Lorna and Yami from the shadow of one of the lights in the park a small distance away. While Barry and Iris were waiting, Victor, Yami, and Lorna emerged from the shadows several meters away. Lorna, from the look of it, wasn't a big fan of shadow travel as the shadows were quite creepy. However, she kept that to herself as Victor made himself known. Behind you. Barry and Iris both shot around and they saw Victor standing a couple of meters away. Iris sighed in relief as she had gotten spooked. Valerian, it's nice to see you again. Victor nodded. The feeling is mutual, Miss West. I read your article, and I liked it, though I see the lack of a photo caused you some trouble. That was an understatement, as she had people calling her ethics into question. Many on the internet called her a liar, making up stuff for likes and attention. Isn't that the truth? Lorna stayed a distance away while Victor and Yami approached Barry and Iris. Barry looked Victor up and down and could see why the criminals of Central City dreaded the shadows and the night. Nice to meet you, Valerian. When Victor reached them, he extended a claw gauntlet to Barry. Likewise. Barry shook his hand and could feel the strength in Victor's grip. When they released their grip, Victor took a step back. Did you bring your suit? Barry raised his finger where he had the ring that kept his suit. Right here. Victor nodded. Ah, perfect. If you don't mind, when we get done with the talks, I would love to enchant it for you. Helping the Flash stop crime during the day is a worthwhile investment. Also, you really need some magical protection for your identity. It was very easy to find that out. Barry cleared his voice as that was quite embarrassing. I see, I will appreciate the assistance. Victor nodded, but first the turn to Iris. So, Miss West, would you like a picture first? Or would you like to start the interview first? Iris raised her notepad as she preferred to get his words first. The interview, I can get the photo later. Victor was fine with that. Perfect, ask your questions. She was just glad he was open to talk, as she had asked Barry to introduce her to Batman, but he refused. Both as Batman and as Bruce Wayne, so she was glad to have someone else open to talk. Regardless, it would help Victor's popularity by showing he was open to talk and not a recluse. He would be in the spotlight more in the future to better start it on his own terms. For now, he waited as Iris asked her first question. 26 comments, 0 vote. The reaction: I will now refer to Victor's dark and light weapons as twilight weapons and gear. While Iris prepared to ask her questions, Barry was looking right at Victor. It had been several months since criminals began to get strung up throughout Central City. At first, no one had any idea except for the mutterings of those who faced night in person. The things they all had in common were severe internal damage, broken bones, and terror-filled screams of living darkness. Even after recovering, they all had one thing in common: the absolute terror of the dark, and dogs without exception. Iris' father, Joe West, who had interviewed those criminals, saw them break into cold sweats at the slightest bit of darkness. When asked why they feared the dark so much, they all said it was because night could become the shadows. It reminded Barry of Bruce, but where Batman used the shadows, night could become and control the dark. He had seen the hardened killers and gangsters nearly wet themselves at the smallest dogs. A thing about Victor's armor was that he applied terror and nightmare-enhancing runes across his armor to increase the fear he caused. Barry was snapped out of his thoughts when Iris began her questions. I would like to first say thank you for these interviews. Last time, it was sudden, so I will be more thorough if that is okay. Victor nodded as he didn't have any problems with that. That is fine. Ask away. Iris looked at her notepad before she asked her questions. First I would like to ask what you think of the way the people of Central City think of you. It is easy to see online that your approval rate is rather high among the people of Central City, but some people think your methods go too far. While rare, you do mutilate and cripple some individuals permanently. What would you say to the people who disapprove of your actions? While I understand that my actions can be seen as too far, the alternative is unacceptable to me. I will explain my method and how severely I deal with criminals, as there is a method to my brutality. Those who are committing petty crimes, I let them off with a scare and some bruising. Burglars and drug deals get off with broken bones since their crimes affect people more thoroughly. As for the ones I mutilate, I leave that to mass murderers, rapists, and child molesters. I can't get to all of them, as many hide behind closed doors and I don't know everything, but through my actions, I make those that can change redeem themselves through terror. If the citizens still disapprove, there is not much else I can do, but do what needs doing. I am a vigilante after all. I am taking the law into my own hands, so I can only follow my own rules. Iris wrote that down before she moved on. Good to know. Now, what if the Justice League does not extend an offer of membership? What will you do? Victor shrugged, as if they rejected him. It wasn't like he needed them. Nothing. If I do not get an invite, I will simply extend my work to other cities. I may go to Gotham, since I feel Batman could use a hand. Barry's eyes shot up, as that was not a good idea. Bruce hated outside heroes and vigilantes in his city, especially one like Valerian who would disrupt the criminal underworld of Gotham. Valerian, maybe avoid Gotham. Victor, Iris, Yami, and Lorna glanced at Barry, who felt a bit awkward. It was like he was saying that he shouldn't try to help stop the overflow of crime in Gotham. It's that Batman dislikes others to enter Gotham. Several vigilantes that began to operate in Gotham were mostly forced to stop. Victor snorted. Bruce has been known to take offense in the past. Barry cleared his voice once again as Victor without shame said Batman's real name. That gave Iris another question. She already knew the identities of the League, so she didn't bring it up. That brings up a question. What do you think of people comparing you to Batman? Many have compared your actions to the Dark Knight, since you both operate in the shadows. Your way of dealing with criminals involved lots of trauma, just that you often go further on average. What are your thoughts on Batman and his time in Gotham? Victor smiled behind his helmet as he spoke on this. Batman and his Robins do what they can, but it is not enough. Gotham is a shithole full of corrupt politicians and eccentric mobsters, and it needs lot of work. Batman does what he can to help, but he should swallow his pride and get League assistance more often. Regardless, that is my pledge. I will begin working in Gotham regardless of what Batman thinks. If he tries to force me out, I will simply ignore him. He doesn't have any powers after all, and he doesn't own Gotham after all. Iris smiled as she wrote this down, as it would get a lot of attention. So, regardless of the opinion of Batman, you will fight for the people of Gotham. Victor nodded. They need the help, and Batman will have to eat his pride. He won't be able to kick me out. Who knows, maybe he will learn a thing or two from me. Iris glanced at Barry, who seemed to want to say something. Barry. He looked at her before he looked up at Victor once again. That may cause problems, since Batman is a founding member of the League. If you cause trouble in Gotham, he may try to bar your entry to the Justice League. Not that I would, I just think that maybe staying out of Gotham would be a good idea. As Barry looked up at Victor's dog-faced helmet, he waited for a response. Victor tilted his head before he shrugged. That is fine with me, I will just ask Superman. Everyone knows Superman is the most important League member after all. Iris wrote that down, as that was going to get a lot of attention. Barry's face fell, as he was one of the founding members too. Saying that Superman was the most important felt insulting. I get Superman is strong, but he isn't the most important. Victor nodded. I guess you're right, Superman is powerful but poor. Working as a journalist doesn't pay that much. Now we can't forget Batman's money. Maybe Batman is the most important. How else would the League work without Bruce Wayne's donations? Iris wrote all this down, as this article was going to bring huge attention. The opinion of a high-profile vigilante like Knight, or as he liked to go by, Valerian, would make her article front and center. She had a few more questions, but she decided to cut to the chase. Now, this is something many people want to know. Will you ever publicly make an appearance? You said you were willing to do a press conference. Will you still do it? He nodded. Sure, I don't mind, though I don't mince my words, as I am not a politician. I don't need to lie to get my thoughts out to the people. Oh, this is something more important. I would like to apologize to the doctors and nurses who were forced to deal with the injuries I caused. They should not have to waste their time on criminals. Iris nodded as she noted it down, but now she looked over at Lorna. She had stayed quite the whole time, just levitating a couple of meters away. Would you mind if I asked your apprentice some questions? Victor glanced back at Lorna, who glanced over. You want to talk to her? Lorna shook her head. I am good. You can keep the spotlight. I am fine with staying a bit more quiet. At least for now. Victor turned back to Iris with a shrug. She isn't in the mood, I am afraid. Now, do you have any more questions? I think I will be making my leave soon. Iris thought about it before she thought of a good one. I do have one more question, but you don't have to answer. Your secret identity. If there ever came a time when the government asked all heroes to register their identities, would you give yours? In the past, such bills were almost turned to law. Victor glanced down at Yami before he shook his head. Hell no, it's not like they have the means to find out who I really am. I don't think the US government has any loyal magic users, or do they? Iris glanced at Barry, who shrugged, as she didn't think they were. Otherwise, they would use them far more often for different incidents. With that question, Iris reached into her pocket before she got her cell phone. She handed it over to Barry before she walked next to Balerion. Do you mind? He shook his head. Not at all. Yami, still in full armor, walked around and sat in front of Victor. His helmet was identical to Victor's berserker armor and matched his aesthetic. With Yami and Victor in position, Iris smiled at Barry, who raised his phone and snapped a picture. Victor decided to take this chance to increase his popularity. Take a couple more. Barry glanced over at Iris and smiled at the chance to make herself even more famous. She had used pictures with the Flash, who just so happened to be Barry, to promote her articles. As such, Barry continued to snap pictures of Iris next to Victor. Eventually, Iris had a request. This is going to sound a bit funny, but can you place your sword on your shoulder? Victor began to laugh as he reached behind him and drew his sword. He placed the large greatsword, which crackled with black and white lightning and fire, on his shoulder. Iris loved it, so she put up two peace signs while Barry took pictures. Iris glanced at Barry before she made up her mind. Barry hit record. Barry did as she said and began to film her video. Iris stepped away from Victor before she asked her question. Now, let us settle this for those who didn't believe me. What is the name you want to go by? Balerion. Knight works too, but my name is Balerion. Iris nodded. Thank you for your interview, Sir Balerion. With that, Barry stopped recording before handing the phone back to Iris. While began to look through the photos and the video, Victor turned to Barry. May I see your suit? Barry looked around and saw no one, so he extended his fist and from his ring emerged his crimson suit. Victor grabbed it when it emerged before he began to analyze the material with magic. Ah, a heat-displacing and friction-reducing compound. I can work with this. I just can't do it in front of you since my magic is a personal thing, you see. After all, magic is a personal art, but enchanting is different. Barry understood that somewhat. I see. Victor thought about it before he handed the suit back. Tell you what, leave your suit with me along with the ring and I will enchant and enhance it for you. When I finish, I will have my hound deliver it to you. Shouldn't take me more than a few hours to finish. Barry thought about it as he stored the suit back into its ring. It was a risk, but since Balerion was more than amicable, he decided to take a leap of faith. That is fine, I will trust you with this. He handed his ring over with his suit, which Victor dropped into his shadow. Seeing his ring fall into the shadow once again made him question how that worked. Okay, I need to ask, how do you turn shadows into portals or storage decided? How do you make something not solid, solid? Victor patted Barry on the shoulder before he told him the secret. Magic. With that, Lorna flew over and placed her hand on Victor's shoulder. With that, the three of them fell into Victor's shadow in moments. When they were gone, Barry kneeled and he patted the shadows on the ground. How does it work? Barry knew magic was real, but he still tried to explain it through science. How did magic turn shadows, which were just a blocking of light, into a solid construct or a portal? While Barry's brain worked at 1,000,000 miles an hour, Iris began to walk back home. She had a lot of work to do on her article. This video was going to go viral on the internet and her promotion was guaranteed. As for Victor, when he returned to his house, he instantly sat down on his chair in the living room. His twilight armor fell off his body into his shadow. Yami did the same thing before he lay down at Victor's feet. As for Lorna, She used her magnetism to remove her gear. So, what is the purpose of your interviews? Victor shrugged as he pulled out Barry's ring. They are fun and they get my thoughts out to the public. Victor brought Barry's suit out before he began to analyze it further. Who knows, I might turn enchanting into a business for the League. Are you a superhero, but married to a mortal? Are you worried for their safety? Not a problem, buy enchanted gear to protect them at a discount now. Buy from Balerion, Knight, and Enchanter. Lorna smiled as Victor created new Twilight enchanting tools to work on this. He was going to place some runes that reduce friction, displace heat, self-repair, clean, and ways to protect Barry's identity in the mask. Of course, he was going to put any copying runes that would make it impossible to memorize or even see the runes properly. When he was done, the Flash would be even more terrifying to the criminals of the world. He might even be able to extend this to the other League members if they accepted his membership. He had at least had Barry's vote, which was important. Then again, he was fine to work solo too.